All right, everyone. Hi again, Mike Ivensey, Director of Growth and Partnerships here at CNote. I see we've got a nice group with us now, and people have kind of thinned on trickling in, so I think now's a great time to get started. First, I want to thank you all for joining us today. Today, we're going to be covering and looking at solutions. So what are ways foundations and CDFIs can partner together to help underserved communities really weather this crisis we're all going through? And before I get started, I just want to acknowledge, obviously, there are a lot of issues happening right now and a lot of things that make us all uncomfortable or have the feeling that we can all do something else or something more. I'm extremely proud to share that all of the presenters today are deeply committed to social justice and they're action oriented more than anything. And so I'm excited for us to explore through these presenters that I'm about to kind of overview some of the ways they found solutions and found ways to make and invest in change and drive change in their communities. So quickly, I'm going to go over the format of the webinar. I do want to call out to all of you that there's the option to share questions and chat as well. So feel free to ask questions or make comments along the way. And then we may share some poll questions with you just to find out a little bit more about the audience. And then we have reserved time at the end of this presentation for Q&A. So we will cover any questions that you ask. Feel free to ask during the webinar. We won't interrupt the presenters, but at the end, we'll bring everyone back on stage and have the opportunity to kind of cover any questions that you felt you wanted to get further exposure on. So going to format, first we're going to hear from Carolyn Nowry from Virginia Community Capital, a great CDFI, and she's actually going to be presenting with Michelle Nelson from the Community Foundation for a Greater Richmond. Michelle and Carolyn have a deep relationship and partnership, and so do their organizations. And they're going to be covering some ways that foundations and CDFIs can really build a deep partnership and attack and address certain social issues and target outcomes together. After them, you'll be hearing from Avo MAKDESSIAN, apologies if I mispronounce your name, from Silicon Valley Community Foundation. Avo's a leader at that top foundation, and he's going to be sharing some of the really unique investments and opportunities that they've pursued to support response and recovery efforts. And then Avo's expert is in educational initiatives at the foundation, so he may have some interesting perspectives there as well. And then after that, you'll hear from Lisa O'Mara of Locus Impact Investing and Catherine Bergman, CEO of CNote. And Locus is focused on really delivering place-based and locally targeted impact investments and really the implementation of impact investments. And so is CNote. And so our hope is that at the high level, at the beginning of this presentation, you're going to hear from a CDFI and a foundation about ways they've partnered. You're going to hear from another leading foundation about interesting investments they've deployed and how they've made that happen. And then after that, you're going to hear from CNote and Locus and understand how they have worked together to help foundations and other investors, family offices, really deploy funds with high impact in their community. So with that said, I'm going to invite Michelle and Carolyn on stage, and they're going to take it from here. All right. Yeah, here we go. We have Michelle and Carolyn. Wonderful to see you. Short introduction, but I hope it was useful. I'm really excited to hear what you two have to say. I'm going to hop off stage now and let you take it from here.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And thanks everybody for joining the call today. I'm Caroline Nowry, Director of Investor Relations at Virginia Community Capital. Virginia Community Capital is a statewide CDFI whose mission is to support housing and community development ventures, increase jobs, and build sustainable communities by offering not only flexible financing, but also technical and advisory services. So our primary mission is promoting community development in our target market projects that benefit low to moderate income people and communities across Virginia. We're a little bit different than a traditional CDFI, which, our structure is we are nonprofits certified by the CDFI fund through the U.S. Treasury as a CDFI, but we also own a for-profit bank, which is really exciting. It gives us a chance to leverage partnerships and investments in very different ways. We can, as a bank, we can secure deposits. As a nonprofit, we can secure grants. We can secure investments from our financial and institutional and personal individuals who want to invest with us because they see the social impact that we have across the state. As of year end, I think you'll see we have a slide up that shows sort of our social and financial impact. I don't know if we can, there, just past it, yeah. So you'll see, as a total project impact, and this includes not only our dollars, but dollars leveraged on other projects. Since our inception in 2006, we have about a $1.75 billion impact across the state. So we're very proud of that. We report out to our financial investors and our social investors, not only our financial metrics, but our social impact metrics. And as you can see from this slide, very excited to share some of the big highlights. 80,000 jobs created or retained since inception, 28,000 technical assistance and advisory service hours that we offer for free, that is supported by our philanthropic partners in grant dollars. We offer our focus areas include access to healthcare, access to food, particularly in food deserts. Affordable housing is one of the biggest parts of our portfolio, and then small business as it relates to job creation. So we have as the bank, we are FDIC insured. We are a benefit corporation at the bank level, and then we are also a B Corp. So that's pretty exciting. I wanted to share a little bit about one of the first responses we did during the pandemic crisis. We've had quite a few, but this was a big one, and it helps to lead into the partnership that we had with Michelle. We were already a PPP lender, or we were already an SBA lender, which enabled us to participate in the PPP programs, the Payroll Protection Program, when it was announced. It came out really quickly, and there was a high volume of need in our community in Virginia. We have over 60 employees, and we shifted teams that have never worked on lending before to help design a system to respond to the great need we saw in our community. It was fast, and we learned our lessons during the first round, and we committed to the second round, and we had some incredible results. One of the things that we really wanted to focus on were smaller businesses that really needed that payroll protection, but also our nonprofits who probably don't really think about securing financing, and how they had access to this program as well. So our total loans outstanding, I think as of today, are about 30,303 loans. Over 3,500 jobs retained, which is huge for our community. 38 of the businesses that we helped were nonprofits. 84 were women business owned and 65 minority business owned, which is also very important to us in our communities. 83 of the loans were in high minority and 36 were in high poverty areas. So we feel like by making that initial turn for the organization, and we were all working remotely at the time too, so there were quite a few challenges, but that we were able to make the biggest impact out of the gate. You'll see in this slide that Hope Pharmacy is one of our clients here. We had been working with them last year to help them establish a pharmacy that's located in a grocery store that just opened in a food desert in our community. We helped them acquire an additional line of credit for working capital and payroll. And then when the payroll protection program became available, we were able to help them utilize that program to retain their 5 employees. And as a response to COVID, Dr. Brown, who is the owner of the pharmacy, she began producing hand sanitizer for first responders at no cost. So that was kind of a multi-level, really felt good on that level. I think in the other pictures, the Virginia Beach CDC, we all know that providing housing and support is essential during the pandemic, especially housing, as we were all locked down. The Virginia Beach Development Corporation help provide affordable housing opportunities in low to moderate income areas in the Hampton Roads area of Virginia, which is our coastal area. We provided a paycheck program protection loan to them for any related cost that they had, and they were able to retain and continue work for their 26 employees to provide these vital community services in the community. So those are just two small examples and just one of the tools that we used during our initial response. So VCC and CDFIs, they provide banks for funding where traditional banks aren't necessarily able to. Maybe they don't understand the organization. Maybe, their underwriting criteria might be a little different. But that's what we're here to do. And we can't do that without the partners that help us. And one of the biggest partners that we have are our philanthropic community. We've long been a partner with the Community Foundation, and I've known Michelle personally, which is great as well. And so I wanted to invite Michelle on to share more about what their response was, because they had an incredible response as well right out of the gate, and then also about our partnership.
Thanks, Caroline. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're doing well. I am Michelle Nelson, and as Caroline mentioned, I'm the Chief Financial Officer of the Community Foundation for Greater Richmond. Our Community Foundation's mission is to make the Richmond region a better place with bold solutions and inspired philanthropy. This mission became incredibly important to our community during the COVID crisis, and now with the racial injustice conversations that are happening in our community following the death of George Floyd. Our Community Foundation was founded in 1968 and has approximately $1 billion in assets. We have about 50 staff members, and we have a significant portion of donor-directed grant making each year, as well as discretionary grant making, which is directed by our staff and board. Lisa O'Mara, whom you'll hear from later, was a former colleague of mine at the Community Foundation. Our discretionary grant-making focus areas are typically cultural vibrancy, economic prosperity, educational success, and health. The COVID crisis really allowed community foundations like ours the opportunity to step up and be a leader in response in their respective communities. Our Community Foundation put its value of collaboration into overdrive during the crisis, working together with corporate leaders, other funders, government leaders, and community members in order to establish a central fund for our community's response to the COVID crisis. The Central Virginia COVID-19 Response Fund was established in late March in partnership with the Emergency Management Alliance of Central Virginia and Plan RVA. Both those are quasi-governmental or governmental entities. The four focuses of the fund for the emergency response phase were health, food access, housing, and schools. To date in this fund, we have received contributions of $5.8 million, and we've granted out over $2.8 million thus far. The Community Foundation contributed $1 million to get the fund started. Donations really will be individuals, corporate funders, other foundations, etc. The fund is now adjusting its focus from emergency assistance to recovery by really switching its concentration to housing stability and workforce development. Many of our donor-advised funds have also contributed to COVID-related causes and organizations. Beyond the fund, the foundation also had to make significant changes in internal processes in response to the COVID crisis, and to allow employees to continue working from home, which is expected to continue through the fall. Our Community Foundation also looked for ways we could use our leadership position and the strength of our balance sheet to make an impact beyond our grant-making dollars. We partnered with Virginia Community Capital, our region's CDFI partner, in 2 ways to do this. First, we partnered with VCC and others to hold virtual learning sessions for nonprofits on how they can access provisions of the CARES Act and the Paycheck Protection Program. Community Foundation simply provided the platform for VCC and nonprofit partners to be able to share knowledge and resources on these topics. This was extremely helpful and impactful to our nonprofit partners in the region because but when they went to apply for PPP relief programs, many were blocked by their banks, especially the larger banks in our region. VCC stepped up and offered to help out once again by allowing our nonprofit and small business community to apply for the PPP program through their platform, whether these organizations were current customers or not. This action alone created immeasurable impact and sustainability to our nonprofits and small businesses and their employees, as Caroline just discussed. The second way we've partnered with VCC in this crisis involved using our deposit accounts for greater impact. Our community foundation and one of our foundation partners, a supporting organization of the community foundation, previously had money market accounts with VCC. We'd established these deposit accounts with VCC several years ago, both for financial and for social impact reasons. The money market accounts were paying higher interest rates than many of the large national banks and many of our community banks. And we also knew that because of VCC's platform, the funds were being used for loans and development opportunities in our region for local impact. VCC approached us about whether we'd convert these money market accounts whose interest rates would be dropping given the lowering of the rates by the Fed into longer term deposits with minimal interest in order for VCC to be able to push out more PPP loans in the region during the subsequent rollout phases. We were happy to make the switch in our deposit accounts in order to provide more impact to those who needed it the most. This is just another example of how community foundations and CDFIs can partner with each other, both in times of crisis and during better economic times, which I hope we will resort to soon. We really value having a strong CDFI in the community and look forward to partnering with VCC more in the future. One of our board members quoted author Peter Drucker about the foundation's partnership with VCC, and she said, "Management is doing things right and leadership is doing the right things." And she was proud of thinking of innovative ways where we can really impact the community beyond our grant making. And with that, I'll turn it over to the Silicon Valley Community Foundation.
Thanks, Michelle. I'm inviting Alvo on stage right now, and he should be joining us momentarily. He's just getting ready. And if anyone has any questions, we're going to ask those at the end here, and I've got a few as well. Hey, there he is. Good afternoon. All right,
Hi, everyone.
I'm going to let you take it from here. We're really excited to hear about some of the innovative work you've done in response to this crisis. Thanks for joining us today.
Mike, thank you very much. And thank you to Michelle and Caroline for that presentation. Also, a general thank you to CNote for putting this on and giving us the platform to share some ideas here. Again, my name is MAKDESSIAN with Silicon Valley Community Foundation. We're a foundation out in California. We have about 2,000 fund holders through donor advised funds and about 100 corporate clients with their corporate advised funds. Like Michelle out in Greater Richmond, we also have discretionary grant making portfolio, and however, the large majority of our grants are directed through our donor advised funds. We also have about $80 million on deposit with CDFIs and try to partner with them on mission aligned work, which we'll get into here in a little bit. Full disclosure for everyone, I work on the community impact side of our house. that includes grant making and convenings and public policy and research. So I'm not as well versed in financial investment vehicles. So I too am going to be learning a lot from this call. So thank you for your patience there if I can't answer your questions directly. I'll just be going through a couple of things around some of the activities that our foundation has been engaged in with the COVID-19 response and recovery, and a little bit around laying the groundwork on unlocking capital and investment as we're deploying that out in Silicon Valley, and happy to answer questions at the end when we get there. So really quickly, many of you know on the call that community foundations are really primed to respond to crisis, given our connections to the community, knowing the needs of the community, and having relationships with partners that can be deployed rapidly to address those needs. Many community foundations have pre-qualified nonprofits or partner agencies that can respond to emergencies when it happens, and those pre-qualified organizations are certainly ones that we have and had to deploy for the COVID-19 pandemic. The funds, like Greater Richmond, we launched a couple of funds to respond to the crisis. We have 5 total funds focused on basic needs for individuals, focused on nonprofits for their emergency operations. One focused on small businesses, where we partnered with the Opportunity Fund, a CDFI, to get the money out to local small businesses. And then 2 smaller funds on education and childcare. We're proud to say that these funds so far have raised, and we've been able to grant out over $140 million to local and state organizations. And this amount was really just meant to be for the response phase of the crisis. And as the economy is going to reopen, we are part of a number of conversations, like many of you, on how we rebuild and reimagine our public and private systems to ensure that our most vulnerable in the community can not only weather this crisis, but be on solid footing for the next one. That said, I wanted to just say that we as a community foundation are not moving too quickly to recovery phase, so that we don't take our attention away from this long tail of the response phase and the critical basic needs that folks still need. One example is that the peak of philanthropic giving really happened for us in the first few weeks and couple months of the crisis. But the peak of the need, as we're seeing it in community, is right now, as more layoffs are looming, as stimulus checks are running out, and companies are putting hiring freezes in place to rethink their own sustainability and operations. The need is growing right now. So the other thing that we're doing, I think that is smart, and we encourage other folks to think about, is what some of the emergency provisions, ordinances, or policies that were put in place at the outset of the crisis, how many of those provisions and policies will last when we get back to the new normal. Some examples are work from home policies that Michelle had mentioned, the need for childcare, eviction moratoriums. can those moratoriums now be converted to stronger renter rights laws? So these are things that we're tracking right now, and trying to ensure that they last beyond this initial response crisis phase, because they're good ideas, and a lot of folks are going to be in crisis for a long time. If I could shift to a little bit around to some of the investment areas that we focused on, and I'll start with the grant making that we've focused on. This crisis has really shined a light on the philanthropic sector and our own operations. And some of the things that our foundation and many on the call are doing now and have done for years is how do we unlock our own grant making to be much more focus on general operating support. And so we as a foundation are shifting from project-based grant making for our discretionary funds to general operating support. And I'd say the more intentional focus there is around movement building and being more agnostic of the issue, and rather having the community drive what the issue should be, but having our funds provide some of the capacity to get the movements built and sustained. I think the crisis that we're also facing, that Michelle mentioned, around racial injustice, racial disparity, structural racism, is exactly being manifested through the disproportionate effect of the COVID-19 crisis on communities of color. And we're hoping this type of movement building, grant making can help start addressing that in our local community. Also very, operational, we're moving away from reporting requirements that are onerous and burdensome to our grantees, and focus really more on phone calls and site visits, and really paying our nonprofits for their time to do so, because we know what a burden some reporting could be. So those are just some basic things that many folks have done over the years, and certainly has shined a light on all of us in philanthropy to do more. In terms of unlocking capital, I'd say one thing that's been different is we don't very often go directly to our donors of our 2,000 funds with direct solicitations. The COVID-19 crisis really was a call to action for us to do so. So we did solicit all of our donors to give more out of their DAFs. And it's something that we've done very sparingly in the past, but I'm hoping it's something that we continue to do to unlock more of the capital sitting in our donor advised funds. Another thing that's directly related to this call is a pilot that we're exploring with CDFIs and recoverable grants to see how we can get again, unlocking our donor advised funds in the form of recoverable grants to CDFIs, and seeing how we can do that at scale. Something that private foundations do all the time with recoverable grants and PRIs, and community foundations not as much, especially with our donor advised funds. So working on a pilot to do that right now. I think we might get into it a little bit later, but some of the ongoing things that we've done with CDFIs, something Michelle mentioned, is really how we work with them to influence their lending behavior, and ensure that they're getting the benefit from our grant making and our deposits, but also the community's getting the benefit, and it's aligned to what we want to do as an institution. One example is an anti-displacement pledge that one community bank of the Bay Area had signed. That, and they made a big public push of signing that anti-displacement pledge, and it was something that we partnered with them on to do. And others have more informal agreements to meet geographic and mission alignment, but that was something that was pretty public statement that we were proud to be a part of. And then the last thing I'll mention is I said that I'm on the grant making and community impact side of the house, and with foundations as large as ours, sometimes that side of the house doesn't talk to the investments and finance side of the house. And I'm proud to say that we've done so. And one thing that we did was a partnership with Self-Help Credit Union, where we have some deposits with, and we were able to connect our investments team with Self-Help Credit Union and some local partners on the ground in San Jose, California, in a community that has been traditionally unbanked, for them to open up a new branch in that part of San Jose. It's a very basic thing, but I just thought I would mention it, that sometimes the grant making side of the house and the investment side of the house stay in their own silos, but I'm hoping that this crisis can help us innovate a lot more on partnerships and bringing silos together, both internally, but also throughout the sectors in our community. With that, I know we have a couple other presentations coming up, but I'll be open for questions later on. Thank you all.
So I'm going to bring up Catherine Berman and Lisa now to talk a little bit, and we'll have Avo and the rest of the presenters back on to do some Q&A after that.
Hello, thank you so much. Thanks all for joining us today, and obviously a great group of presenters. I think this next section is we're going to talk, Lisa and I have the benefit of getting to work on both sides with amazing CDFIs as well as inspiring foundations that really are seeking to do deeper, more meaningful impact, especially at a time right now. And excited to have this conversation with you, Lisa, around what Locus is doing, what Locus has done beautifully for years, and then of course what has changed, right? Because I think many of us who joined the call today, it's really about action, right? It's really about less about just understanding that we're in the middle of a pandemic, understanding that there's deep systemic inequality that's country for years, and also understanding that each of us on this call have an opportunity, and I would advocate an obligation to do something about it. And so what are those very tangible things that audience members can walk away with in terms of thoughts and next steps of engaging CDFIs in that aim? And so I think we're going to just start with just an overview around each organization. So I kind of put those slides. Wonderful. So I can kick it off. Again, this is Kath. I am co-founder and CEO of CNote. So we are a woman-led impact investing platform, and simply put, we are on a mission to make it easier to access CDFIs and really close the wealth gap and racial injustice in this country. We say easier to access CDFIs. Over the years, we have found that there are quite a few friction points that can make it challenging for foundations to both identify and access their local or their mission-focused CDFIs. And at the heart of what we do is use technology and data to really drive that to fruition. We've been doing that work for over 4 years, and I'm proud to say we've been able to do work with some tremendous foundations and CDFIs across the country. We are nationwide, and so we do have footprints across the country right now across different impact themes, and really drive that measurable impact in that last bullet point, with over 60% of CNote funds supporting women and minority-led businesses in particular. Next slide. Probably a key piece to know about CNote is when we partner with organizations, when we partner with foundations, it's really using these pipes that we build to make it more efficient. We realize that over the years, it has been sometimes challenging or cost prohibitive to create an investment structure that works with your CDFIs. And so that's really where we've tried to bring in technology to make it more efficient and more cost effective for CDFIs to say yes and really double down on their mission by working with powerful CDFIs. We do this both with identifying CDFIs, but also really helping get those dollars out the door in a way that works for the foundation. Oftentimes, I'd say pre-COVID, that was around market rate returns. And during COVID, it's really about understanding what that foundation's mission is, aligning with that, making sure that those funds are really what that foundation and its community is hoping to achieve in this really challenging time. And lastly, I think a piece that we have increasingly worked on at CNote is the idea of customization, the idea that impact is deeply personal. And what one foundation may consider to be climate work could be very different than another's. What one foundation considers to be work on women's equality can be very different. And we see that reflected again and again. So what we really do is use our infrastructure to meet that foundation where it's at as it relates to customized impact investing. And let me turn it now to my colleague Lisa, who works with Locus, to talk a little bit about their fantastic work.
Thanks, Kat. So similarly, our offerings are very customized as well. And our target is to work with place-focused foundations, whether it's a community foundation, a private family foundation, a health conversion foundation. Foundations that care about the place where they're located, could be a small community or it could be an entire state, tend to be where we're doing our work. We've also started partnering with some of the philanthropic serving organizations around the country. Indiana Philanthropy Alliance comes to mind, where it's a group of foundations that come together. And as Kat said, we also are looking at what does that foundation need in terms of strategy, in terms of policy, in terms of process, and decision making in order to get more of their assets into their local community. And that's where we come in. We want to root those dollars. They were made in your community. We want to keep you investing them in your community, and we help foundations figure out how to do that. I'll go ahead and give it back to you, Kat.
Okay, great. And we were hoping more of a conversation than anything, and again, leave time for Q&A at the end, because I think Lisa and I both come from unique vantage points of getting to partner with foundations and meet them where they're at. One of the things I've appreciated about Locus over the years is when a foundation steps in to want to work with a CDFI, oftentimes there's a litany of things that has to happen before. And whether that's establishing the impact strategy, whether it's understanding the alignment, or even just the governance piece of it, right? And so it's not lost on us the important role that Locus plays to really make sure that stage is set before you can even execute, right? And so I guess the first question I would ask you, Lisa, is given your work with foundations and some of that stage set friction points, what do you think are the one or two biggest challenges you've seen over the years foundations have in terms of not immediately onboarding or working with CDFIs?
So I want to jump on, because you said through the years, and I will say that Locus has been around for 3 years now. We are a startup organization, and we know that the field of local impact investing is still evolving, and we're hoping that we're helping it to evolve more quickly. I'd say that the mindset is the biggest thing that we see. Foundations approach CDFIs like a grantee, and CDFIs approach foundations like grant makers. They kind of pigeonhole each other instead of thinking about, all right, what's the mutually beneficial relationship we can have that builds on our strengths and uses our assets in different ways. And we all know CDFIs are a really important part of community infrastructure. And we also know foundations can do a lot more than just make grants. It's just that sometimes we just get into our holes and we approach the work that way. During a presentation I participated in last week, Randy Myers, who's the CEO at the Community Foundation of St. Clair County in Michigan, was saying when he comes to the table, he really hates it when everybody looks at him as a grant maker. He said, we're impact makers, and we're at the table to make impact, and grant making is just one of those tools. I feel like, the examples we've had today, they've clearly gotten over that bias. But it still exists a lot in the foundation community and CDFI world. One more example I thought might be really good is that we've been working with a foundation in Bloomington, Indiana again, and there are no CDFIs, but the CEO of the Community Foundation and the economic development folks in town recognized this is a capital gap that we need to fill, and we need to have some CDFIs paying attention to us. And so they have worked with a new nonprofit called CDFI Friendly America to start CDFI Friendly Bloomington as a way to attract CDFI capital to the region. So I'm going to throw it back to you.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate the shout out to Mark and the entire CDFI America team, because they are doing really exciting work. And if you're not familiar with them, I encourage you to check out that link of how they are helping build CDFI communities across the country. Yeah, and I would say, I think a few of the friction points that we see often again and again is not a lack of intention, but the operational piece, right? And so we often work with foundations who are ready and believe that CDFIs could be a wonderful complement to their mission, could be an added, source of impact as it relates to where we is the how. How do you actually get that across the finish line? And so where we're seeing a lot of friction is okay, now that I know I'm interested in doing it, how do I actually, what's next? And so we talk a lot about the checkbox, right? In terms of everything from identifying that you have the right CDFIs to work with, to really making sure that both on the financial and on the impact. Because to your point, Lisa, oftentimes as foundations, we may step in and going, okay, the impact aligns, but that investment has to get through the investment committee. And so it's really important on that we shine a light on that and make sure that we've identified not just the CDFIs that meet your impact criteria, but that also meet that financial criteria that's going to make for a great partnership, right? And then that final piece I would say is the structuring. I think that's a thing we often spend a lot of time really helping both the CDFIs and the foundations solidify that structuring. Middle piece of how do I actually get this into an investable opportunity and actually put into my portfolio and then report the financial impact metrics. It's almost that last mile that really has been passed, and I'm happy to share, you know, that is the area that we have focused a lot of our time in our partnership on. One example I'd give to you would be the Sierra Club. So the Sierra Foundation is one of our wonderful partners, and to us, they had tremendous appreciation and affinity for CDFIs. But did they have the 10-person underwriting team that was going to go and diligence CDFIs across the country to underwrite all the CDFIs that work in the areas that a nationwide organization like Sierra Club works in? Absolutely not. And so how we partnered with them is to really understand from a mission perspective what they were hoping to achieve, from a financial perspective what they were hoping to achieve, and then use our technology to make it cost effective for them to actually get the dollars going to those CDFIs across the country. But I think it's that last mile. We understand so many well-intentioned foundations want to work with CDFIs, and we can't underestimate that for many years it was really hard to get to that next step. So I think that last question is certainly something that we've seen. And then I'd also say what I've seen more recently is even just kind of making that bridge of connections. We oftentimes find that, you know, a foundation has sat in a community and maybe knows one or two of their local CDFIs and not the other 7 others. And so that's a very common refrain we hear. And so how do we really expand that pool, both from a opportunity perspective as it relates to more diversification, but really a racial justice perspective? Because oftentimes it is those smaller CDFIs that can produce some of the deepest impact. And so we see tremendous opportunities, not just work with and expand the conversation with those who are new to CDFIs, but also really talk about those who are also working with existing CDFIs. How do you broaden that effort as well? So I think that how has also been a friction point that we're constantly working on.
Well, and I want to build on that and just say a lot of times when we're brought in to work with a client, they have either had an opportunistic sort of investment opportunity where they went in, they had no strategy, they weren't really sure why they were doing it, but they knew it was going to do good. So they said, let's just go for it. And then so Lucas usually comes in at that point and we're trying to backfill on the strategy part. And I think you're right that it has to get through the investment committee, and traditionally those have been sort of banker type, more conservative approach, wondering if it's legal for my community foundation, wondering, you know, am I giving up my fiduciary responsibility if I let the foundation do this? And so that's a lot of what Locus is doing on the front end, where it sounds like you all at CNote do a fantastic job of connecting on the back end to the actual investable projects in the communities. So it's sort of the continuum of the local impact investing. And we have found with our clients who we start this conversation with, a lot of times the staff feel like, yeah, we get it. We go to these webinars. We figured this out. We really want to do it. But they haven't had that same conversation with the board or the investment committee. And so they're very nervous about that. And when we can model what carving 5 or 10% out of a permanent endowment looks like and what the impact is on grant making, it gives them some sense of something tangible they can show the board. And a lot of times it's a lot less impact than the board members imagine. You know, they really have that sort of scarcity approach to it. And we have to sort of interrupt that and say, no, there's plenty here. And you could still carve out 10% and keep your grant making budget and have even greater impact with the 95% of your assets that are invested in the market right now. So
Yeah.
It's definitely something that we get excited about, and then staff feel much more empowered and are able to move forward with the policy and the governance and the process changes that they need.
It's such a great point, Lisa. And one of the things that comes up for me in that is just such a key role you play in the translation and communication, because oftentimes you'll have a champion internally that knows this is a good idea, and then translating that to everybody else, including the investment committee and the other decision makers, can be challenging. So can you speak to an example of where Locus has come in that early strategy phase and really help connect the dots for a foundation around that?
Yeah, so I was kind of hinting to that just a second ago, but we did have a foundation where they were all set to carve out a piece of their grant making budget and said, we're going to take X amount, I think it was like $2 million out of our grant making budget, and we're going to go ahead and have that be our impact investing dollars. We're like, why would you do that? Your unrestricted grants are the most valuable, dollars that a community foundation has. Have you thought about taking a piece of your endowment or up to 4% of your endowment and just looking at this like another asset class, like you do your other asset classes that you're invested in the markets? And they're like, yeah, well, we're not sure our board would go for that. So we were able to interview board members. We were able to interview, through their help, some of their DAF holders, donor advised fund holders. And they were really happy to hear that the feedback was, yeah, we want to do this. We think this totally makes sense. And we are empowering you, foundation, to go ahead and do that. So in the end, they ended up creating a policy where they could spend up to 4% of their endowed assets on local impact. We're thrilled. And in the end, that is such a better use of all of their assets.
Absolutely. No, it's a great example.
So, Kat, I know we had talked about, there's been a lot of conversation about the impact of COVID and whether or not that has created any sort of different opportunities in the market right now. And I wonder if you want to speak to that, or you want me to give some feedback on that?
Sure. No, it's obviously an important conversation. Yeah, I think certainly it is a challenge and an opportunity, right? I think all of this call know that what's happened is this has exacerbated all the deep systemic issues that created during this time. So it's not only shining a light, but widening that gap. And so we are sad to see it, and yet we also know that there's a lot we can do. Our approach at CNote, as I think I alluded to, is very much around the power of data as we think about this. And so when we think about how we make this easier for foundations, we do start with how do we make it more cost effective and seamless for you to actually move those dollars in the way that double down on your impact? And then how do we make sure that's an equitable investment? And one of the things we've realized with data is our underwriting strategy. His underwriting CDFIs, it's usually 2 to 5 folks on a team, a lot of subjectivity, going through the numbers and creating a final diligence memo. And if you slow that down, what you realize is that deepen that is a lot of bias. It's almost inevitable, right, when you focus it so much on human subjectivity and human error. And so we've really tried to take a step back and say, well, what if this was a data first approach to underwriting CDFIs? What if we really looked at organizations not from but really from what, in terms of the finances and the impact? And so because of that, what we find is that it creates a much more equitable landscape of investable opportunities. And just to give you a sense of that, the CDFI fund overall, right, of the entire grants given out to the CDFI fund, about 26% of it went to CDFIs led by people of color. Year to date, CNote investments, over 90% of them have gone to minorities. And so if you think about, why, part of it is the intentionality we do at CNote, is we're very bold making sure that everyone is exposed to those types of opportunities, right, from a pipeline perspective, but it's also the underwriting. It's also a very unbiased underwriting methodology to make sure that we are truly giving those CDFIs across the map an opportunity to receive more dollars, as opposed to just the same few CDFIs that everybody knows and loves that often reflect very little diversity. So that's been kind of one approach, is really highlighting the importance of data and use of data in a time like now, where again, those injustices are just exacerbated. And then I think the last piece I would just say is flexibility. The work we did prior to COVID is a lot of customization. So we work with foundations and we say, what do you care about? And then how do we craft a fixed income or cash instrument so you can double down on that? And that could be place-based. You care about Detroit, you care about Oakland, you care about New York City, or also can be theme-based. You care about homelessness, you care about justice. That flexibility of being able to really work and meet folks where they're at was helpful before COVID. It's instrumental now, right? Because what we've seen is not just the importance of being flexible on the type of impact a foundation wants, it also requires flexibility in the type of return and investment. I'm guessing you've seen this as well, Lisa, where we worked with a lot of foundations prior to COVID that were very market-driven, and they love the fact that we can create these market-driven vehicles. The investment committee loves them. They fly through the executive, and everybody's happy because you're getting market rate returns alongside impact. In the middle of a pandemic, the calls we're getting now are also around, but what else you can do impact first? So can you put something together that still emphasizes what we care about, but we no longer are wanting to put return first for this vehicle. We actually want to do as much impact as possible. And so that's been exciting to see that change. And again, not with every partner, but certainly quite a few who really see this as an opportunity to use their investments and use that patient capital at a time like now, which again, it requires just the utmost flexibility, I think, from all sides. So that's been the changes that we have seen and that we have witnessed going in the right direction, I would say. I'd be curious about you, Lisa. What have you seen in this environment? How has this changed kind of your work?
Yeah, so I wanted to build on what you were saying about the focus on returns. At Locus, we really do have the luxury of working with a lot of foundations who already, when they get into the impact investing conversation, are thinking concessionary returns. So we have that was already on the table in a lot of conversations, but now it's even more so. Like you said, you're not getting the returns you would have seen in the market anyway. And people are recognizing that, yeah, you know what? Our capital is the catalytic capital that can make the difference. If we're willing to, increase our deposits to the CDFI, like Michelle talked about, in order to allow Virginia Community Capital to be able to lend at a lower amount, and all we want to get back is our principal, that's great. We have the ability to do that, and that's kind of what we're seeing, those conversations happening, that foundations are saying, yeah, we need to be the catalyst, and how can we do that? I'd also say, just for Locus as an organization, when this all started, we honestly were a little bit nervous about, as a consulting firm and asset servicing, are we going to see a big decline in people and foundations having interest in this? And it's been just the opposite. Like you said, it shined a light on the inequity of our traditional systems, especially our financial systems. And we're getting more and more calls from foundations and philanthropic serving organizations saying, we got to get this message out now as we go into recovery. So as we rebuild, we're doing it the right way. And we're creating better systems. They're going to be more equitable over time.
Yeah, and I want to highlight something you said that I think is so deeply important and is a real takeaway from this call, which is cash. I think one of the things we heard from a lot of our partners, new and existing, is what do I do with my cash? In an environment where a lot of folks are hunkering for safety, they're recognizing that fully insured cash products are a massive opportunity to do good and do well, right? Do a lot for low-income communities, for communities of color, and still protect, right, your assets. And so I'm glad you brought that up. I think our earlier presenters gave wonderful examples of how that's been mobilized. And we've been working with a lot of foundations on that front as well with the Promise Account vehicle that we work with. But I encourage everyone on this call to explore that, whether it's your local CDFI bank, your local credit union, or through one of these other opportunities. It really is, I think, a very timely conversation around what are you doing with cash at the de minimis. And that's up. So I think that's our time, Lisa.
Thank you.
Yeah. So at this point, I'm going to invite the other presenters on stage, and I want to keep this conversation going. It's been great. I just want to bring everyone else into it as well and answer some of the questions we've gotten. I see one right here for CNote, and I think maybe Locus as well. Is what are the main indicators you use at CNote to support CDFIs across the board?
Can you repeat that one more time, Mike?
Yes. what are the main indicators you use to support CDFIs across the board? So I think that's maybe selection criteria or how you're sourcing CDFIs, I think is what that question is driving at.
Yeah, it's a great question. So first and foremost, it's a nationwide footprint. So we came into this saying we don't want to do what we've seen historically in the CDFI industry, which is a pocket of winners and a lot of folks not getting access to capital. And again, when you think about this pocket of CDFIs that get the most capital and everyone else, not shocking is that everyone else tends to be African-American-led CDFIs, Latinx-led CDFIs, CDFIs representing communities of color. So we are very deliberate in terms of having a nationwide footprint that really sees this as an industry play, not as a true winners and losers play. So that's kind of number one as a company. Secondly, I'd say we have a 3-part diligence system, and I most of the credit to this to all of the incredible industry experts that we brought in. Very early on in the CNote journey, we brought in Opportunity Finance Network, so OFN. We brought in ERIS. We brought in the CDFI. So we brought in country leaders to help inform us of what were the 30 years of best practices that we should build into our model to make the most informed, accurate CDFI. And then how do we infuse that with data to increase efficiency? So the 6 months to a year that it used to take for folks to underwrite a CDFI, we can now decrease that to a level that is cost effective and timely so foundations can move much quicker on these investment decisions. I'm happy to talk more about those 3-part gates, but essentially is kind of obviously kind of a financial historicals analysis that you would expect, a risk scoring model, and then a 3rd part social finance community that goes very deep into the local piece and the local nature of investing in CDFIs. So again, happy to share more offline. I don't want to take all the Q&A time, but the underwriting piece is really where we spent the majority of our time early on to make sure that we are really bringing best practices of 30 years of history and data to understand what responsible way to risk price and underwrite CDFIs.
Carolyn, I had a question that came up when you were presenting. I'd love to ask is how did your PPP activity compare in scale to the normal lending activity you would do over a year? Because I've heard it's been quite drastic.
It was huge. We did more loans in the first, I think, 3 weeks than we did in 2 years, just by the sheer volume. Now the loan numbers are very different because they're smaller amounts. You know, we do a lot of affordable housing and a lot of larger construction and acquisition loans, so they were smaller amounts. But yeah, we were working Saturdays, Sundays, everything to get that filled. So it was a tremendous volume.
Yeah, and then thank you, Carolyn. We had another question come in about kind of preparedness, and Avo answered it kind of in the text chat, but I'd love to explore it with Michelle and Avo. Is, you know, when you see this crisis coming, one, how did this impact your operations and ability to execute on grants and investments? And then 2, you know, what were any lessons you learned about being deployment ready or, you know, building partnerships in the front end so you could be more responsive once this crisis happened?
I'll start. I mean, I said in the chat box, you know, failing to plan is planning to fail. And really you need to be ready before crisis starts. So coming up with what your response plans is going to be when you're not in a time of crisis is really important, and making sure you have those partners in place so that they could be activated in a time of crisis. Also, withstanding some criticism about how much you're spending during times where the economy is going well. We all know that we have that happening, so that you can spend more in crisis times when your communities need you the most. I think it's really important.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add is something that we're doing a little bit of catch up on is ensuring that the funds are actually flowing to where we want it to go. And so some of the evaluation criteria, having those in place as money flows out is something that has taken too much time for us right now, I'd say, and we should have been prepared to ask the right questions from our grantee partners without being burdensome. So I would add that to it, to the mix as well in terms of preparedness. In terms of our organization, I'm sure you too, Michelle, like my day job, forget that, that's out the door. I'm running a couple of response funds right now. And so, and it's slowly shifting, but our entire organization has shifted to response mode, at least for the last couple of months. And we've had to put on hold some of the longer term systems change really thought leadership that's going on, like with this call, for example. We weren't able to have these calls 2 months ago. So I think we're getting back there.
There was something that came up that Avo brought up, and I think we've seen some kind of questions around it, which is getting the investment side of the house to talk to the philanthropic or grant making side of the house and aligning. And one of the questions we got on that point was like, it was a portfolio level question of MRI, PRI, how much of that is impact focused. But I think broadly, that idea of like, do you see this changing or evolving, the two sides of the house talking together, or this crisis changing that? Just any comments from anyone, actually. Be really interested to hear your perspectives on that and how this might drive change in the future.
I'd like to jump in and just say that that's part of our goal with our consulting work with all of our foundation clients, is to break down any silos and bring both perspectives to the table. And when we work with a foundation, we're typically asking staff and board members to be part of that conversation. And we always say, we want your CFO there and your grants chair, and we want your investment committee guy, which is usually a guy, forgive me. I think that's how you make this more effective work. I'll leave the others.
I wrote in the chat box, but cross-pollinating these committees, making sure you have investment folks on your grant-making committees and grant-making folks on your investment committee, so they understand the unique challenges that both committees are facing, is really important. And then creating some sort of structural communication plan between the two teams. I have regular meetings with our head of leadership and community leadership and grant making, and we just talk about what each person's doing on a weekly or monthly basis. So just creating those communication channels.
I'd also just add, I concur with everything that was just said. I couldn't agree more. And I would also just say, really taking time to understand the language and the priorities of the different sides. I think one of the things I saw walking into this is we were fortunate that on our folks that come from the philanthropic and social impact measurement space, as well as from the pure finance space. And so they could speak both, right, languages. And I didn't even realize how critical that would be until we got into these conversations, to your point, where when we spoke to the CFO, frankly, it was very much, 70% of our conversation was going to be about what is the financial strength of this investment you're putting in front of me, right? What is the stress test, risk analysis, diligence criteria, right? And again, because we have a lot of financial expertise in-house, that's for us to do. That is not always easy to do, right? And so really trying to understand who your audience is and show up with the language of that audience, I think is helpful too, because oftentimes we just come in expecting people to speak our language. So I think that empathy goes a long way. And I think, the speakers today are perfect examples of knowing how to bridge that.
Thanks for that, Catherine. I was just going to say, a couple of years ago, my investment guy is talking about PRIs and recoverable grants and going on. And I'm like, oh, you mean loans? Okay, I got it. Now I got it. And then, on the opposite side is, disproportionately affecting communities of color. Well, what the hell does that mean? And so we had to go through a little training with our investments team there too. So it was, I couldn't agree with you more. Our languages are so different.
So a question came in kind of follow on to what we're talking about, but I guess in your foundations, and this is probably Avo and Michelle, is like, how do you think about impact on your investment side, PRI, MRI? Has that thinking changed recently in light of this crisis, or has it been kind of a priority for a long period before that? I think folks, especially maybe smaller foundations that might watch a recording of this, might want to understand how that thinking has evolved over time and kind of draw inspiration from some of your work, if you're willing to share.
I think Avo and the Silicon Valley Community Foundation is much further down this line of thinking than we are in Virginia. But I would say I think it's going to be a slow shift, and I think making tweaks along the way and making our investment committee understand that it could have a social impact as well as a financial return on top of that is really important. And then just populating your committees with folks that understand those relationships and that both can be achievable is important.
Yeah, I would argue, Michelle, that we're not that far down the road in terms of some of the activities put in place. In terms of thought, we have thought about it a long time. You know, the opportunity zones legislation was another sort of milestone point for us to think about what's our role in capital advocacy related to opportunity zones, for example. So that was, you know, there's been little points over the years where we certainly could do a lot more, but I think, you know, the crisis is really making us rethink all of our you know, connections to capital, including our donor advised funds, which is something that all community foundations across the country are looking to see how we can utilize them more, particularly with recoverable grants and using those funds to do that. So I'd say we're still pretty nascent, even though we're a large community foundation.
Well, great. Thank you all. I want to respect everyone's time. We got a lot of very busy people doing a lot of really important work on presenting, and then also I'm sure attending as well. So I want to respect everyone's time. I'm happy to share the slides, and there's ways to reach out to folks and facilitate connections as well. You'll have my email address. If there's any follow-up questions, I'm happy to route them to the presenters to make sure you get those questions answered. I want to thank everyone for joining us. Deeply appreciate you spending your time sharing some of your lessons and learnings from the industry. Thank you all, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. And at this point, I'm going to sign off. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.
Thanks all.